Hey everyone, last week Nintendo announced that the 2016 reboot of Doom would be coming to Switch, and would you believe it, I actually played it at a Bethesda press event the day after the reveal. Now all you guys got to see was this footage from the last Nintendo Direct. It's literally the only evidence that this seemingly impossible port is actually real. But yeah, that is indeed what it looks like. It's Doom, visually pared back in resolution and detail, but still Doom. Just as long as you can swallow a drop in frame rate from 60 frames per second to 30, you'll be fine, but yeah, that drop really does sting. Still, regardless, we've not yet seen any cross-platform port for Switch as ambitious as this one. And Bethesda isn't finished yet. Doom releases for the holiday season this year, but astonishingly, a port of Wolfenstein 2 is coming in 2018. id Tech 6 has been ported from current-gen consoles to a handheld. It's utterly insane. I mean, how did they do that? And more than that, if we can get Doom running on Switch, what does it mean for other cutting-edge multi-platform engines? But first up, just how close is it? Well, I'm going to compare PS4 to Switch on a tiny selection of the footage that we have. Even just a couple of cutscenes tells us pretty much everything we need to know. So to begin with, depth of field, it's there on Switch, but obviously of a lower precision. No real surprises there. You'll also notice that the presentation is a lot blurrier, as you can see on the feet here. Suffice to say, resolution is much lower on Switch. Moving on to our next freeze frame, of course, you can see the reduction in texture quality here. Now zooming in on this edge here, we can get an idea of resolution. Pixel counting on Doom is difficult enough, and this compressed feed doesn't help. But yeah, it's low, sawtooth edges smoothed off by the temporal supersampling. The reduction in texture quality is more pronounced here as we close in on Doom Guy's armor, and even more pronounced in this shot. Check out the wall to the back right there. But look, the post-process pipeline in Doom seems to be mostly intact, so just how is this achievement possible with what is essentially mobile technology? First things first, id hasn't done the port itself. It's farmed it out to Switch specialist Panic Button, who are also handling the Switch conversion of Rocket League. But yeah, Doom, that's a port on a whole other level. And I set out to prove it by making a PC to run the game as close to Switch spec as possible. So let's talk CPU. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to use Switch's A57 ARM cores here, so I've actually swapped in AMD's Jaguar in the form of the quad-core Athlon X4 5350. The Switch's A57s actually have better performance per clock, but as you'll see later on, the use of Jaguar here makes the point I need to make quite succinctly. Memory, 4 gigs of DDR4, similar to the Switch, but it's the GPU where we can get closest. Switch's Tegra X1 uses NVIDIA's Maxwell technology with 256 CUDA cores. When docked, it runs at 768 MHz. For my Switch GPU surrogate, I'm using the new GeForce GT 1030, 384 CUDA cores, a 64-bit memory bus like Switch, and well, yeah, I've seen this thing hitting 1.8 GHz, so we're gonna need to downclock it. But here we are on my Switch surrogate's desktop. MSI Afterburner, I couldn't downclock the memory much, so yeah, the memory tends to hover around 2.5 GHz, but with a config hack, I could push core clocks down, right down. Now in theory, you can achieve the same level of compute as Switch by running the GT 1030 at around 500 MHz, but this means that everything in the GPU is slowed down, not just the CUDA cores. So I've given it a bit of extra breathing room, and we end up at 620 MHz. And that's still preposterously low for a desktop PC GPU. Next up, I'm dipping into the NVIDIA control panel, and I've engaged half-rate adaptive VSync. This will limit frame rate to a properly frame-paced 30 frames per second, just like the Switch version of Doom, but we will see tearing when the game can't hit its performance target. Okay, now we're in Doom. It is running, and I'm going to make one final tweak. Going back to the task manager, I'm going to force the game to run only on 3 cores. A compromise the Switch version has to make, as one of the ARM Cortex A57s is locked for the OS. Now, I'm kind of hoping that Windows will automatically defer to that available core rather than interfering with the others, which will be busy, trust me. Okay, so let's begin. All settings here are low, base resolution at 1080p, and I'm using the 8x temporal supersampling option, which I kind of suspect is active on Switch. In the advanced settings though, you'll see that I'm using a 50% resolution scale, effectively running the game at 960 by 540. Yeah, I think you can rule out 1080p on the actual Switch version, and based on the footage we have, as low quality as it is, well, my guess is that the resolution is very low, almost certainly scaling dynamically like the other console versions. I'm also using the Vulcan API, the closest thing Doom can offer to the kind of low-level access a console API has. Opening level here, and well look, I'm using mobile CPU cores and a bargain basement GPU downclocked by 1.2 GHz, and the game runs. Low settings might not be great, but the fact is that generally PS4 and Xbox One are running just one step up on the equivalent to PC's medium preset. The first observation I want to make, check out the CPU utilization on the top right there. Despite the 30 FPS cap, we're pretty much maxed out there, which kind of explains why we're seeing that performance drop on Switch. Core 3 isn't used anything like as much, but you will note occasional spikes. Now this is the core that we reserve for Windows, and I'm guessing that Windows itself is kind of carrying out tasks in the background there when that core spikes. Otherwise, well, frame rate is kind of doing okay. 30 frames per second by and large, just like the Switch version. We do dip beneath though, and I've got to say that based on my experience, we are losing more frames than the Switch version. When I played it, busy scenes could see performance dips on the handheld, and they weren't quite as bad as what we're seeing here. On top of that, Doom on Switch retains pretty much all of the post-effects pipeline, even if it is at a lower quality, and that includes depth of field. And yeah, that effect tanks our downclocked GT 1030, meaning we'll need to turn that off to retain any semblance of playability. But overall, you know, possibly we've proved that the id Tech 6 technology does have some pretty impressive scalability here. We've got some crushing PC overhead to deal with here from Windows and the APIs, but I think we've established firstly that the 30 FPS cap was kind of inevitable. I've got 3 Jaguars at 2 GHz here, and they're tapped out. Meanwhile, Switch has 3 A57s at half clocks, so the notion that id Tech 6 is running at all is highly impressive, I'd say. And ballpark GPU power can run the game, but I'd say that based on my experience with the Switch version, that console is handing in smoother performance overall. Now maybe that's a factor of being able to scale resolution dynamically. Maybe some settings are lower than low, or maybe just, well, it's a good port. But one thing I did find is that the more Doom I played using this surrogate Switch setup, the more performance drops I encountered. More testing levels challenged the Switch too, but I'm pretty sure that the frame rates are better than the wobbliness I'm encountering here. In fact, I'll be honest with you, the game verged into unplayable territory in many levels. Now Switch gets choppy, but based on my 40 minutes of play in arcade mode across a range of stages, I'd say it's definitely smoother than this. So, we've sort of been labouring under the assumption that Doom on Switch is running on the equivalent to the lowest settings, but with the post-effects selectables enabled. But is that actually the case? Let's test the theory by going back to those screenshot comparisons. Remember that really difficult depth of field effect that our PC couldn't run? Well, here's the PC low versus Switch comparison. It looks like Switch gets an extra low preset here that isn't found on the PC. And to be clear, I'd rather have that than no depth of field at all. Next up, that edge comparison. Interesting one here. I reckon that the Switch is possibly running at lower than 540p here, but the low textures also seem to be in effect. Dynamic res would really be a good fit for this console build though. That said, the Switch is streaming in texture data faster than the PC version here, and that's something you can see more dramatically in this shot. And yeah, even with textures fully resolved, here the PC's low setting is beating Switch in some areas. Gut feeling here perhaps, but I reckon developer Panic Button is using a grab bag of quality presets and dynamic resolution to get the most out of the Switch hardware, something that I can't really do with my surrogate setup here. Okay, more frequently with PS4, Xbox One Pro and X, a lot of people out there seem to think that you can match your teraflops or whatever and you can get a console-style experience on PC, or better. I'm going to be fascinated to check out the final version of Doom on Switch because I think that our broadly equivalent PC system here is going to get owned. And to illustrate that, allow me to let you in on a little secret. All my observations from Switch Doom so far, well, they've been from playing the game in mobile mode, where GPU clocks are at 300 to 384 MHz, whereas my PC here aims to replicate the dock Switch, though I do think that those screenshot comparisons do come from the dock version. I reckon that the docked version will up resolution and offer smoother performance. So, could more AAA engines and games end up on Switch in the future? Now, Doom and id Tech 6 seem to have a number of advantages. Firstly, the PS4 and Xbox One games run at 60 frames per second. It looks like cutting to 30 does wonders in resolving the lack of CPU horsepower. Now secondly, the engine itself is clearly very scalable, and not every engine has the bottom end performance of this one. So to illustrate, here's Battlefield 1 running on our surrogate Switch PC. Low settings, 540p, and good God, it's hideous. And the frame rate craters, it's almost hilariously bad. Bottom line though, I mean look, I've played a respectable looking version of Doom on what is effectively a tablet, and that is seriously impressive. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about the Switch port of Doom in the comments below. And yes, in the fullness of time, I will be overclocking these Jaguars and seeing how they compare with the same technology running in the consoles. So do look forward to that one. But in the meantime, do like, subscribe and share to support the work we do. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.